So if you think about the big monolithic banks that have had these sort of release cycles of multi-years and stuff, I really think that it's very difficult to then shift them in a cultural way, shift their staff into this sort of new agile and very flexible, nimble model. Francisco, can you give us a little bit of insight into what's happening and how the banks are working with fintechs to actually solve that cultural problem?
So the first thing is, I always differentiate between the combination of the persons, the people culture, and the firm culture. The first one, the void is not that big anymore. I mean, you find you go into any bank, and a lot of the innovation is just waiting there. You have a lot of people. You have talent. I mean, the banking sector is probably one of the sectors, any industries, that has the biggest talent. But then the second one is you have people, just because people that are in their 40s like I am, have already been raised with technology. So it's becoming second nature to them. They understand, they get it. They live with the pain of the big company culture, and they feel that something has to change. So that's to the side. The company culture is something very different. So, and it's basically something that gets built because it's been built during the last 100 years, even more. Something that's driven by regulations, having complex systems, having shareholders, having to report every quarter, with a company that has pretty much zero cost of failure. So you have huge cost of failure, zero cost of failure. So that makes it that even if you had the best environment, they're always going to have a different culture. So what things have we seen that people are doing different? You see things that if you take some of them separately, they seem almost like gimmicky or anecdotal. If you just say, I did a hackathon, or I hired 10 millennials, or we have an open space, or we have a dog, or we have a massage, you do some of that stuff. All separately, they are gimmicky. If you start putting them together, they can create a nice environment for people to do things different. There's a second one, which is actually how do you get things done that actually make a difference in the business. And in that aspect, things like labs, things like actually doing proof of concepts on the view of actually building a business and actually getting a presence. And in some cases, not all of them, investing in early stages of some fintech companies, that can have a big impact on that part. And the last one is educating some of the entrepreneurs, some of the early stage entrepreneurs, the ones that are coming, the new ones that are coming know more about the banks. But the ones that come from the outside, a lot of, for example, my work is telling them there's a reason why banks are slow. I mean, when compliance is compliance, and there's a reason why there's KYC. And a lot of the banks are doing a lot of work also teaching the startups what it means, so that the startups can help them differentiate what is just fat versus what's the muscle that's actually laying down there that is needed.
And Carlton, in the previous chapter, you talked about banks actually, taking or like picking up the fintech talent.
Yeah.
Do you think the cultural issue, do you think we can be solved through just hiring in the millennials, or?
I think we'll have to see how it plays out, is my honest view, because a lot of organisations, as I say, have either purchased or taken stakes. I think it's challenging, because the last thing you want to do is smother the organisation. You need to let it breathe. You need to let the people breathe. And quite a lot of the individuals who are in those organisations want to be in an environment that perhaps has some similar focuses. Banks focus on customers, right? They're very good at it. Banks focus on wanting to innovate. I think maybe the fintech world, maniacally focus on the customer, and they really want to work at pace. And perhaps, because of that regulatory point, I think some of the established institutions have to sort of get ready, aim, unload, and then fire. And that's understandable, because they're having to deal with a much bigger set of complexity. Whereas the sort of startup community can get ready, aim, fire, learn, reload, fire, and that's really, really difficult. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, because there's definitely benefit if you're a large organisation for learning from that sector. But it's also you've also got to protect the customer, and you're dealing with much bigger risk exposure. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. What I do think one has to think about is, just by acquiring an organisation or purchasing a stake in it, that in itself is not going to make any changes. What you're going to do with those individuals, and how you're going to integrate it into your strategy, and how you're going to integrate it into your business operations. And it's very easy in some respects to acquire and take a stake. It's very hard to do something with it, and I think we'll have to see how that plays out.
I think there's also a lot of preconceptions about, for a millennial, what it might be like to come and work in a bank. And I think in certainly some large institutions, that environment is changing quite rapidly. And you can see you've got the classic hackathon that's been referred to, and banks do have hackathons, but maybe that's also a reflection of the culture that's changing. When you see those hackathons, you find hundreds, maybe of very keen technologists, software developers from the bank in those environments. And actually, to your point about the people inside banks, technologists are inherently creative, computer scientists, and they want to embrace new technologies, and actually they understand them. They understand about continuous delivery, they understand these things, and really all they want is to be told that it's okay to do it. Yeah. And a lot of what's going on at the moment inside banks is saying, look, it's okay to do these things. We're going to give you the environment. We're going to provide you a flexible working environment where you can balance your life and your work, that actually maybe it doesn't feel that different from the startup that's half a mile away from us in Shoreditch. And I think it's not happening in all organisations, but it is happening in some, and it's happening very rapidly, and it's those organisations that I think are going to adapt successfully.
Don't assume that the traditional banks are all about people being in process and being bound by numbers, and these new startups are all having a good time. It's actually the other way around, right? These fintechs, these very, very bright people who are applying their big brains on this one particular problem to solve, are really doing something that's very different. And they're actually coming up with metrics and measuring how they perform, and they're coming up with ideas because they have to succeed. If they don't succeed, they're not there tomorrow. That sort of pressure, that sort of incubation creates really great ideas that change financial services forever. And that is very, very difficult to replicate in a big organization where, even if things go very, very wrong, nothing really changes. We went into the 2008 crisis, financial services crisis, and we came out and nothing much changed.
I think that's a very interesting point, and I think that as I said, in my company everybody enjoys it and has fun, but they know it has to work, has to ship, and has to go. However, I think I'd like to just talk for a second about the risk and how people attitude towards the risk. Yeah. So we've said before, many people have said before, that people are risk averse, for projects in the bank. But I mean, let's think about a different part of banking, the trading floor, right? So there, people embrace risk, but they do it in a systematic way. And if some trades go wrong, that's not the issue. The issue is systemically, that as long as the person on the organisation succeeds, then it's fine. And there is a similar sort of, there are parallels between that, and the software culture, whereby, people can, accelerate through the system based on their skills, and it's kind of, based on clearly observable performance metrics rather than, political skills or whatever else. So, and when we shift the measure of success from if there's ever a bug, you're done for, to, actually, is the whole thing moving forward at the right rate? And, obviously, customers don't want to be exposed by this, but, failed projects, inside, need to be acknowledged rather than pretend they didn't happen. Let's move on. Let's go with it. And I think, related to that point, is the same, adding these cultural features together within the organisation helps. But I think we also need to look at, people's careers. It's not so much millennials versus non-millennials. It's, there's been too much of a career path in a bank or in some sort of professional services organisation or a law firm. It's very much, you start out, you're overburdened with work, and then it's a trial by fire through multiple hoops, and then you'll make senior director or partner or whatever, and then and that just doesn't, that's gone. That doesn't appeal to people. But people want to know in the first year that they're actually making the difference. And I think that's something that fintech companies, or most tech companies, can do. You're hired, you're in a small team, and off you go, and it's going to go live soon. And people go, wow. So you can't put them in charge of massive projects because they don't have the wisdom to manage all the risk of that. But they can do, you give them enough, they can do their bit well. And that's, I think people respond to that. When we pay, there's definitely a movement of top talent from investment banking into technology,
and it is not because of the pay, it's because of the culture.
I was going to say perhaps the common ingredient there is leadership. You know, I think it's very dangerous to say it's about established organisations and new organisations. There's good established organisations and there's less ambitious established organisations, and there's good fintechs and there's fintechs that are less thought through. The ingredient, you can perhaps maybe, there's more in the fintech space who are being really ambitious to want to lead, but the common point is the strength of leadership and vision.